It's been a strange week.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah. Well, I'm glad you decided you were going to take some time to talk to me. And of course, this comes on the heels of a video you put out.
Fight the system effectively?
Yeah, so if you don't mind, just providing a little context.
Okay, so for those of you who haven't seen the video, essentially what I'm suggesting for people, okay, we have a homeless problem, and one thing is being added to the community, a housing project, and a lot of people who are very upset about the homeless and, well, mostly the actual criminal element, they're very upset that we're getting housing, but we're not getting any added support for drug addiction, mental health, and policing in the court system, and anything like that. Nothing's changing. You're just getting a place to put more homeless people, and they think it's going to be a horror story. And so they've gone to try and beat up on City Council, to try and get City Council to tell BC Housing, take a hike and take all your money with you. And I personally think that's a fruitless exercise because, well, number one, BC Housing is a Crown Corporation. They are a higher level of government than City Council, and it's a private sale on private property, and the zoning is correct. So I don't think there's any possibility that this project is not going to go ahead on any legal basis. And some people have said, well, hang the cost, take them to court. Well, I also think that's going to be a very expensive, fruitless exercise. Right. And here's the thing, I've been doing City Council, covering City Council, bringing it to the world for 13 years here, and I have seen groups try and beat up on City Council quite often, and half the time... Yeah,
I was on City Council.
He was on City Council, yeah. And half the time, they're actually trying to complain about something that City Council has no control over. They're trying to get City Council to take action on something that City Council has no power to take action over.
No jurisdiction.
Yeah, because they don't really understand about how government works. They don't know the ins and outs, and they don't pay attention until, of course, somebody tells them, oh, they're doing something you don't like, and they come down, they want council to fix it. Okay, so that's the background here. Now, here's the thing. We had a rally in support of council just before the last council meeting, and as I understand, it went quite well. But afterwards, there was a little bit of loud people have come from the rally, and I'm not saying that they were part of that group, but they were loud. They were outside council, and cops had to get called on them. And, well, gee, here's the thing. If you protest your city council, the people who can actually make a decision about better policing and more resources, better courts and how the courts run, mental health, drug addiction treatment, and housing, none of those organizations have their head offices in our little town.
Right.
The people who can make the decisions, they're often the provincial capital in Victoria, or they're often Vancouver, or they're on the other end of the country in Ottawa, in the nation's capital. And will they even hear about some small town having a little demonstration beating up on their council?
Particularly when every little town and big town in British Columbia,
Yeah.
if not Canada or Canada nationally, is dealing with the same issues.
Right, and that's part of my issue with this. So what I did was I looked at what they were doing, and look, one more little piece of context. Somebody shared with me a post that was sent by a person from the group that's trying to get this changed here. They were actually reaching out to a group in Nanaimo, which is like on the island. It's on the other end of the province, pretty much. And the last thing in their little message was, together we can band together to take BCH down. I don't really agree that they'll be able to do that, but here's the thing. If you complain in Vernon like they have, and it was on CBC, but locally, provincially, if you complain in Grand Forks, if you complain in Maple Ridge, Nanaimo, or whatever, that gets some coverage, but you know what? People in Ontario don't know what's going on, and
right.
Most of the people in BC don't really know what's going on. Here's the thing. If you want change in all these things, if you're reaching out and networking with other towns in BC, then why don't you all get together and time your protests so that every little town where the RCMP, for instance, are the police department, and that's very many places in BC, if you all came out on the same day at the same time and protested peacefully in front of the RCMP divisions saying, you need support, get Ottawa to give you better policing support, more staff, more resources, whatever, so you can do the policing job that we want you to do, guess what? That would get national attention. if they all came out, if we had 100, 150 towns in BC, they all came out and protested, whoa, that would they'd hear about that in Ottawa. And if you did the same thing with interior health, I know on the coast it's coastal health or something like that, but if you did the same thing, then that would get the attention of the people who can make decisions in Victoria about the health issues. And then you can protest in front of the courts, and the Department of Justice, Ministry of Justice would hear about that. Like, here's the thing, coordinated protests will actually garner media attention, and they won't be able to run away from that. Now, I don't necessarily think they'll solve anything,
right.
But
and so to start where we were, where this was going to go, was that I had a conversation with Les following having a look at the video, and asked that very question. It's like, okay, so what if we could herd all these cats together and make the protests and get all the people in BC to do these coordinated protests, and they were successful? Then what? So, because the rub is, at the end of the day, someone's got to pay for this increase in services, and it doesn't come for free. So who does that fall upon? Well, guess what? It falls upon us. Well, guess what? I mean, if all of a sudden the government turns around and says, okay, well, we've heard you. Thank you very much for your coordinated effort, and good to see BC get behind something. We're increasing your taxes. Well, that would be a whole different discussion, wouldn't it?
Oh, it would, definitely. And that's the thing. A lot of people don't realize where the costs are. And a lot of people would say, well, if we didn't spend $4 billion on a pipeline, if we didn't spend all this money in court fighting over things, et cetera, there would be money to go around. And I personally agree with that. But what I really think that this would achieve is simple. One, it would bring the whole thing to the attention of national level media, at least provincial, but probably national. And two, and here's the thing, I know that people in this town have this impression that we get homeless sent to us by other people, that Interior Health or BC Housing is going to ship homeless here from other places and stuff. I know that we had a public hearing or public meeting, town hall meeting last month, and the woman from Interior Health, or BC Housing, excuse me, what was it, Interior? I can't remember. Anyways, Ann Howard, yeah. Well, when she said, because she has a bailiwick that covers a huge chunk of the interior of BC, she said that she hears the same complaints from so many different communities in her area, they scoffed at her. They loudly scoffed at her like they didn't believe her. It's fake news. So if 100 towns all came out and protested about how did they say it in Vernon? Oh yes, our downtown's becoming a shithole. If they all came out and said that, then here's the thing. People in this town would notice that we're not special. We're not. And it's happening everywhere else. That's the thing. The homeless issue is happening everywhere else. We just went to Disneyland for a week or 2 weeks ago, and they have over 60,000 homeless in LA.
Yes.
In Spokane, we went out for dinner, and there's homeless living underneath bridges there. There's homeless everywhere. We're not special. It's not only exclusive to here.
Well, and it's not exclusive to our time either. I mean, as long as we've been a civilization or a civilized species, so-called, certainly for thousands of years, we've had homeless. The fact is, it is getting better.
Well, here's the interesting thing. I was reading a very good, very well-written piece on HuffPost, and they made a point in this piece. Simple. Nationally in the States, over the last 7 to 12 years, homelessness has actually been going down. But you wouldn't know that if you were in most of the major metropolises where prosperity's returned, because in those places it's skyrocketing. And the argument that they make in this article, which might actually hold water, is that this homelessness is a byproduct of prosperity, because the cost of living, the cost of accommodations has gone up where prosperity has come back. And what that means is that all those people who are living one paycheck, one accident, one divorce settlement, one mischance away from losing their job, losing the place they live, and becoming homeless, well, they are even more
at risk.
At risk, and there's even more of them, right? So the more prosperous your community comes, as a byproduct of that, the more people are going to get squeezed through the cracks and drop out the bottom end.
Right? That's an interesting, there's an interesting sort of pair of notions, I think. And, I've talked about this before in other discussions about the difference between a zero-sum and a positive-sum game.
Okay. Yeah.
So, put into this context, it's essentially about the pie. And the notion has been for hundreds and hundreds of years that there is one pie, and that pie can only be divided so far. It's called the lump sum fallacy,
right? Yeah.
Or the lump of labor fallacy. Whereas, certainly post-industrialization and post-enlightenment, as the basis for civilization and society is on reason, secular interests, secular morality, all the rest of it, is that we just have learned to bake bigger pies. So bigger pies, of course, can be divided into smaller pieces, and prosperity is a function of how we make it, not of what we're doing with what we found. You know what I mean? It's not like we found a lump of gold in the ground and now we're splitting it up evenly.
Right.
It's like there is an unlimited resource. It's there, and it's just a matter of digging it up, and that makes us richer.
Right, but
I mean, that maybe is an oversimplification.
Well, if you look at the United States, it used to be that the United States is economic power derived from manufacturing, right? Since the 70s, that has changed, and now the economic driver of the United States is financial services. I mean, it's financial services, and what do financial services actually make? They make money. They move money around. So they can, in a sense, play with that pie and the slices of the pie and everything else. And unfortunately, capitalism is what it is, and a lot of people have talked about this, that the gap between the rich and the rest of us is getting bigger and bigger, and more and more of the wealth of everything is being concentrated into very, 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 very small amount of hands.
Yeah.
Well, if that's the case, then what's happening with prosperity is that they've got a bigger piece of the pie, and it's crumbs for a lot of people, and when those people lose track of or lose their grasp on their little crumb, where do they end up? They end up with no home.
Yeah. But I think we're still looking at this almost pre-industrialization, right? Where this idea of limited resources. I mean, most people nowadays are, say, 200 years ago, 90% or more of the population lived in poverty. Not just poverty, extreme poverty. If you had enough to purchase a piece of bread for your next day's meal, you counted yourself lucky.
Yep.
And just over the transitions through industrialization, post-enlightenment, of course, now 95% of people have a smartphone.
Oh yeah. Well, no, we have a lot of physical riches compared to where we were. I mean, when I was a kid, we only had a home phone, and there was no actual mobile devices and stuff. But here's the thing: if you look at I remember when I was a kid, cigarettes were 50 cents a pack. What are they now? 13, 15 bucks a pack. So if you look at the actual buying power of what your paycheck gives you, really, are you any richer now than you were before?
Yeah.
You can buy nicer TVs, and you can buy a whole bunch of things that never were there before, like computers and video games and stuff like that. But are you paying the same amount or more for the basic necessities of life? Food and lodging and your car and insurance and stuff like that?
There are a lot of studies, certainly, that have been done that do suggest that's true. That the buying power that we have for what we earn is significantly higher. I mean, again, going back 200 years, people, like even during the plague, when the guys collecting the bodies were trying to collect them to burn them, they were fighting people who were trying to take the clothes off the dead bodies.
Yeah, no, I get that.
You know what I mean? So, just the extent to which poverty existed, just as simple 200 years ago, is completely lost.
I understand, but when I was a kid in the 60s, my dad had a family of 3 kids and a wife, and his paycheck was I don't know what it was, $450, $500 a month. Yet he could put shelter over our heads, feed us, all that stuff. And now, if you look at places like Vancouver, families like that are cohabiting with other families the way guys used to cohabit with other guys, purely so they can afford a place to live in. I mean, Vancouver is a special case, but if you look at the trend, what's happening is real estate prices are going up, and not just in major cities, but in the hinterland, both in Canada and the United States, the prices are going up, right? I mean, we just had a flood here last year, and a lot of the people who are going to get dispossessed in one way or another, whether it's a buyout or eminent domain or what, a lot of them are fixed income seniors who have now lost their house, and the amount of money they're actually going to get is not enough for them to buy a new place. So we're going to have a whole bunch of people who are put in the position of becoming renters or becoming homeless. It's what I'm saying is that what I'm trying to get at here is that as the cost of actually being a contributing member of society with all of the trappings that entails goes up, but the actual income, especially for fixed income people, doesn't track that correctly, then that squeeze happens more and more and more. So we have homeless. And yeah, I get it that there are people who, young people especially, or who just want to drop out of society, do drugs all day long and have fun and have other people pay for their lives. But that's not most of them. Right. You have families living out of their cars and their vans because, you have people. When I came back from our little trip, and I posted on Facebook about this, somebody pointed out that they shared an article of a woman who came from Eritrea. She was well liked by everybody, and almost nobody knew that she was living in her car, and she was working at Disneyland. She was dead in her car from a heart attack for 4 days before they found her, and most of her coworkers were horrified that she was living out of her car, and they didn't even know it.
Well, I mean, on a local level, Dara Sutton.
Yeah.
Six times homeless, and she was the executive director for our local Boundary Women's Coalition.
Yeah.
Very intelligent, talented woman who found herself living in her car a number of times simply because there's no rentals or no affordable rentals or rentals that would accommodate her pet or whatever.
Exactly. Yeah. And she had to leave town and go back to where she came from,
exactly.
Really.
So, there's a tendency here, and has been for, ever since the Citizens for Grand Forks formed themselves, that anyone who isn't working is a thieving, drug-addicted, homeless person.
Yeah.
And it's an unfortunate stereotype and generalization. I put an illustration on that group yesterday about the Venn diagram.
Okay.
You're familiar with the Venn diagram, so and I really spelled it out, and I even put a picture of a Venn diagram on there, just to illustrate that biological necessity, the thieving, drug-addicted, homeless people constitute the smallest segment in the intersection of those three circles.
Because they are the most visible and most talked about and give the most rise for concern, then a lot of people who don't really pay attention to what's going on except in their little echo chambers where they all scare each other, as far as they're concerned, or as far as they know, that most of them fit all four of those categories. They're homeless, they're mentally ill, they're addicted to drugs, and they're doing crimes. And that's not true.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So,
and that's illustrated even that simple thing with Dara Sutton.
Yeah, exactly.
Is that she's not advertising the fact that she's homeless. Mm-hmm. So she's one of that segment that goes unnoticed, isn't top of mind for a lot of people, and then is excluded from the visual that people are trying to focus on.
Twice in the last month I've had people, one a senior woman and another one a guy who's just about to become what we would call a senior, both told me that, their house is just sold and they don't have a place to live. Right? Like they're homeless, they have money, but how long is that going to last if you have to pay for a hotel room?
Right.
They're probably going to have to move out of our community if they can't find a place to live.
And often, because we are a smaller community where the current housing prices are relatively low, certainly in comparison to the Lower Mainland and the Okanagan, if they move out of this market, they're probably moving into a more expensive market,
right?
Which means that their dollar that they got for the sale of the house is going to go a lot less far.
And the way the world works now is, if you have a place in Vancouver, Lower Mainland, or whatever, and you sell your place, you get really good money. But then you have to find a place where you can afford to buy something. So you move to the interior. Now they might move to Kelowna and buy something up nice there. The people in Kelowna are going, oh, gee, if I sell my place, I have to move to somewhere where I can afford it.
Right.
And they come to places like Grand Forks. And here's the thing: I remember when I was buying my first house, it was like, oh, let's see if we can get at any kind of get them to lower the price, you dicker and everything else. And nowadays, people come in because they sold their house for good money somewhere else. They come in, they go, asking price, oh yeah, we'll pay you that. There's no question about it to a lot of house sales now. I mean, that tells you something about that marketplace, but it also says something about society, really. The prices are going up and people are willing to pay them, but the income or the job numbers or whatever is not coming back to commensurately cover that. Then yeah, people will get squeezed squeezed out. And good luck if you're homeless. Good luck getting a bank account. Good luck getting a job.
No fixed address. That has a whole series of issues and problems for people that are faced with that situation in and of itself.
Yeah, and if you're homeless in a bigger city like this, here's something that people don't realize. If you're homeless and you're sleeping rough on the street, you don't have a car, and now you're sleeping on the street, you become prey to the felons out there. So what is the advice and where do you go? Well, people say, here, take some of this stuff. It's speed. It'll keep you up all night, and you'll be able to at least be aware when they're coming after you. You won't be a sitting duck and waking up with somebody beating on you. You'll be able to know they're there. Well, gee whiz, you start doing speed.
First one's free.
Exactly. And then after a while, you're a speed freak.
Yeah.
You're a druggie now. You didn't want to be a druggie, but you started being a druggie because you needed the safety of being able to be awake. I'm not saying they all end up that way.
Right. It's one story.
Yeah.
But the fact that there are huge variables that constitute people's stories is part of the illustration here, right?
Right. And I'm sure you've all seen in television and movies how hard it is for people to kick a habit, a real Jones, like heroin addiction or meth, crack, or anything like that. It's really, really difficult. Can you imagine what it's like to have to do that when you don't have a place to live?
Right.
When
and maybe when you're only getting 1,200 calories a day.
Yeah, exactly.
Try go and work for 8 hours on 1,200 calories a day.
So when you hear people talk about supportive housing or low income housing, and they say, oh, no barriers is bad, there has to be some kind of barrier, we shouldn't let them in there if they're still addicted to drugs. My question is, how are they going to get off those drugs if there is no centers in your small town to help them with that? Like, really, you're asking them to literally pull a miracle out of their hat. Like, I don't know that very many people that would be able to actually do that. So yeah, it's nice to keep all these people out, and what's going to happen? Well, they'll still be doing drugs and they'll still be doing crimes.
And they'll just be out of sight, because as of up to now,
until you find your garage broken into and your stuff gone. Yeah.
Well, and of course, the idea that the Second Street facility is going to, bring all these people into town. Well, the fact is they're already living here.
Exactly.
They're just living here out of sight.
Like, if we told
the crime
BC
is
Housing,
happening,
go away, take a hike, take your money with you and everything else, sure, they could go away.
The problem is not going to disappear.
The problem will still be here.
There is no magical solution. They don't just evaporate. That is not the way it works. They're already here. They have been for years and years. Yeah. And that our city, or the citizens, generally speaking, and those services that we do have been trying to address the problem as best they can, given what they have available, right?
And something you may have heard of, and this is one of the things that when I hear this, I think, well, those people somehow think our town is special. I hear this again and again and again.
We're unique.
That other towns send their homeless people here. That homeless people migrate to our little town because they've heard it's a soft touch. I don't know if that's really true, but here's the thing. The option of somebody from the city sitting down with somebody who's homeless, who's having a hard time, having a conversation with them and saying, so where are you from? Oh, you're from Regina? Gee, do you have family and friends back in Regina? Would you actually find it easier to get back up off your off your butt and on your feet, back with your family and friends? Well, sure. Well, we can give you a bus ticket. I mean, that's an easy solution, and a lot of towns do that. They do that, but they don't advertise that to the world. But that option is open to every single town, or at least it was until Greyhound stopped serving Western Canada.
But I mean, the thing you're trying to illustrate here is that every story is unique, and there's lots of options available.
Yeah.
There's no reason to think that one sort of solution has to be applied to everyone, because not everyone's the same, and not everyone comes to be where they are by the same path, and that's just
and not every town is unique. I mean, really, if my crazy idea of getting all these towns to get together and protest synchronized, if that happened, then towns like ours would be networking with other towns, and along the way they'd be starting to find out that other towns have the same problem, that other towns have the same fears, that other towns feel like, oh yes, they all ship their goddamn little reprobates here. Like, really? Well, gee, is this some like big shell game going on? Oh, let's take a bunch of people we don't like and let's move them over here.
Right.
Oh no, we don't like them there, we'll move them over there. You think that's how it really goes? Anyways,
Yes.
I'm starting to get ranty. Probably shouldn't do that.
So one other aspect. Okay, so we've talked about homeless. We've talked about. We haven't really talked about thieving, but I think something we touched on was drug addiction.
Mm-hmm.
So another point I had brought up in a conversation or in a comment I had made on Facebook to this group was that addiction, of course, takes many forms.
Yeah.
And when we identify shit rats and thieving drug monkeys as being the scourge of our community because of their drug use and all that, it makes me think and makes me sort of realize that certainly that group of people cannot be the only ones that are supporting the drug trade in Grand Forks.
There's a lot of people with jobs who are doing drugs.
Right.
They're not all smoking pot.
And again, this goes back to the Venn diagram, where one of those circles is addiction. And whether it's the occasional, weekend of cocaine or some speed once in a while, or cigarettes. And I have to say, cigarettes is an addiction. I don't care how you paint it.
It is, yeah.
And I have certainly sat around the horseshoe at the local pub and heard people rail against the people that they identify as the scourge, and then get up en masse and step outside for a cigarette.
Exactly, yeah. And I've heard people do things like throw the idea out, well, they shouldn't get welfare if they're doing drugs. We should drug test them, right? Okay, do some research and just ask Google about that. And what you're going to find is they actually tried that in the States. And you know what? They spent a couple of $1 million to find out that was like less than 10%. Like literally it was not a real problem at all. But,
right.
They spent a lot of money to find that out. And, now they don't really crow about that because it flies in the face of what they were trying to push.
Sure.
It was something I was going to say. Oh, yeah, here's another thing. Here's another thing about this. Last week, we had a guy here, came into town. I recorded him. I put his presentations on the web, and the people here, and especially people in that group, they love
Brooks.
it. Roger Brooks. Yeah. And he helps towns get up off their feet, become destinations, become prosperous. I get that. That's great. I love almost everything he said. And so do the people in this group. And but the problem I have with this is that the facility is going to go in. It is going to go in. Unfortunately, it's going to be right downtown at the entrance to town, and people here hate that with a passion. And my suggestion to them back in September when it was first announced was that, if it does go in, you could stand across the street with your protest signs making ugly faces at it, and that's going to look really good to the tourists coming in. Or you could go over and you could say, well, I'm worried this is going to become a real mess, and I don't want to see it that way, so is there anything I could do to help? Will the people in this group do that? I don't know. But they love all these things, and they want to help our town get off its feet and become a destination. My question to them is, well, if you're going to still be on about BC Housing's 2nd Street development while you're trying to be rah, let's get off the ground and everything else, how's that going to work? I mean, really, are you going to be smiling through gritted teeth? Like, really, how are you going to get motivated if you're carrying around this big negative weight about all these other things? Like,
Right.
you know, like, really.
There really is two options, right? Is to continue railing against the king, or to embrace it and move on.
Right.
Right?
I mean, you know, it's bad things happen, and unfortunately, you have to live with that. I mean, if cancer hits you, you can go to the doctor and try and get it treated, or you can engage in prayer and wishful thinking.
Right.
I'm sorry if I'm offending your religion, but really,
And so what?
Wishful thinking is wishful thinking. That's all it is. It doesn't solve anything. You maybe feel good while you're doing it, but afterwards, you still have the same problem.
Yeah.
You have to live in the real world.
There is no Santa.
No, there's no Santa. Sorry, but there is no Santa. You know, and really, that's the exasperating part about this, is that most of the solutions I see them pushing out there are wishful thinking, and they're not realistic. And they might argue about that with me, but you know what? Proof's in the pudding. Come back and argue with me in 5 years about how your solutions worked out.
Yeah. What do you think? So, one thing that the Phoenix Foundation, which I belong to, has been trying to put together is a poverty reduction strategy. So I sat down with a couple of folks who are into the local social services scene, I guess, and thought that it was the wrong time to do it. Now, what do you think? I mean,
when you say poverty direction or poverty
reduction,
reduction, okay.
Yeah. So last September, October, Canada announced it's Canada's first poverty reduction strategy.
Okay.
And they actually backed it up because that child daycare credit that was kind of included in it.
Right.
But I mean, there's billions of dollars, $20-30 billion that they're spending over the next 5 years. In a concerted effort to help communities develop poverty reduction strategies, and working with the Tamarack Institute, as we are, whose job it is singularly to help communities, develop these poverty reduction strategies. What would be a better time other than following a disaster of the proportion that we had last year? I mean, when the slate is cleaned, isn't that a good time to start building the foundation? Oh,
it definitely is, right? And it's kind of funny because as a town, we really got kicked. It's historic what happened to us, and we've been trying to get ourselves back off the ground, and it's costing tens of millions of dollars, and we're not getting the help that we think we should get from higher forms of government. But even though all that's going on, what's the thing that people are burning council with the most? It's the homeless thing. It's not it's not why aren't we getting this from the government? Why isn't they going? No, it's the homeless thing. Like it's just kind of weird because that's the perspective they have, because that's the thing that they all talk about in their little echo chambers. And of course they do see the mentally ill and the addicted people being loud and angry and arguing with fence posts. I get that. I do. That's scary. And yes, crimes do happen. Things get stolen a lot.
And it should be pointed out too, again going back to the Venn diagram, that not every thief is drug addicted or homeless.
Exactly.
I mean, there's lots of thieves out there.
Yeah.
Well, I shouldn't say lots of thieves, but a proportion of thieves that are neither homeless nor drug addicted.
No, they're just hanging out with the street people because that's their milieu, That's the people who are doing drugs and stuff like that,
right.
And like down the street, the neighbors to the place we're in right here, last year they were broken into, and there was a guy that is basically prohibited from walking down past their front door and everything else, but he's not homeless. Right. He's just a little felon. Yeah. That's all he is,
What do you think about the restorative justice program? Do you know much about what's going on here in town?
Not that much. I don't.
Okay.
I mean, really, I know some of the people involved, but I hate to say, but I've been too busy with my life and other things, to that. But here's something that I picked up on yesterday, and this got into a spirited discussion with my partner, who's more of a right winger than I am. In Scotland, right, they are seriously considering a basic income
Yes,
for everybody.
Yes.
Like I do like 171 pounds a week or something like that.
Basic guaranteed income or something to that effect.
Yeah. And then people go, well, why would you do that? You're giving them money for not working and stuff like that, right? I get that, I do. But here's the thing. They're trying to save the government money because the cost of welfare and administering welfare and the cost of administering housing support is overburdening the system.
And healthcare.
Yeah, and so here's an example. Here in our country, a while back, we had this thing called a long gun registry. And you would think it would be simple. You've got a long gun, you just fill in these forms, you give them to the government, they put it in a database, they figured it was going to cost them $14 million. Well, gee whiz, after 10 years, they tallied up billions of dollars and before they finally canned it. Why was it billions of dollars? It was billions of dollars because it was a government doing it, and the inefficiencies that they encountered while trying to make this program work ballooned and ballooned and ballooned and ballooned. Well, when you run a welfare system and you force people to have to report that they've looked for work, even though there's no work for them to they have to go out there and jump through the hoops and get somebody to sign off that you actually asked them for a job. And then you fill out those forms, you bring them down to the welfare office, and somebody in the welfare office then has to take those, ingest them into the system, somebody else processes them. These are all government workers.
Bureaucracy.
That your tax dollars are paying for, that are doing what? They're pushing paper around. These people are on welfare. They're getting welfare last month. They're going to be getting welfare next month, right?
So the idea
same thing
of the
with the housing thing, right?
So the idea of the basic guaranteed income
is we're not asking you any questions.
Right.
I don't care whether
Get her
you're
done.
working or not. You're going to get a check, and it's going to help you with whatever you need. And you don't have to jump through hoops, and we don't have to process that stuff. So guess what? We can either furlough a whole bunch of government workers in offices, or we can find something more effective for them to do with their time and the cost.
Right.
That's the way they're doing it.
Yeah.
I mean,
and Scotland isn't the only place that's considering this.
Oh yeah, definitely. Finland is trying it out, and
Yeah.
a whole bunch of other places. And I get it that it rankles people who have never ever shirked anything and have always worked and for everything they have. I do get that. But what costs more in the long run? The support systems needed for people who have fallen through the cracks and then have problems, or just giving them the money and making them safe.
Yeah. And this is an interesting thing I thought about as well, was people who talk about, well, they're spending my tax dollars. Well, if people who are paying taxes get a vote, then they're almost advocating for a system where the more taxes you pay,
the more vote you have.
The
Exactly.
more vote your counts.
Yeah, exactly.
Or the more your vote counts, which is kind of an absurd idea. If that were the case, then Bill Gates would be telling, Bill Gates and Donald Trump be telling the world what to do.
exactly. Well, not
without-
Donald Trump.
without-
Jeff
without
Bezos.
opposition.
Donald Trump isn't that rich. Jeff Bezos
Well,
and
you're
Bill
right.
Gates.
You're
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
Yeah,
Jim
you're
Buffett,
right.
etc.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that in itself is a bit absurd to put it that way, to say
Right.
we shouldn't be giving the money out that my hard-earned tax dollars are. Well, you could be working as a cashier at Fields, nothing wrong with that, but earning minimum wage, that statement doesn't have the same gravitas as someone who is got a multi-million-dollar company that they built themselves from scratch, right? It just. And did you ask them if they are okay with their tax dollars being spent in that fashion?
Right. So
Right.
here's an example of the cost of things. Okay. So in BC, it costs the system a minimum of $1 million to process and deal with a murder. I mean, that's crimes, right? $1 million. If you could cut down on that stuff, then how much money would you save? I remember when HIV was still a really, really big thing, and they were talking about giving free HIV medications and treatments and examinations to prostitutes, and people were up in arms. Why would you give that to prostitutes? What are you talking
What are you
about?
spending my tax dollars on?
Yeah, but the thing is that, when your husband goes and visits the prostitutes and brings HIV home to you, you probably find that was a good idea. But now it's too late.
In all
right?
fairness, wife could also have brought it home.
Oh yeah, but generally speaking, the Johns are guys. But like it's that kind of example. Like if you look at the actual follow-on costs to deal with the healthcare and the issues of people who have fallen through the cracks and become addicted, and then they have problems because of that, in the long run, it's much cheaper just to give them money to have a roof over their head so they don't have to go get addicted.
It is. And it doesn't take a lot of research to actually discover the truth behind that.
You don't have to believe us, though. I mean,
you don't have to believe us. Do the research because it's there. It's available. You just have to be able to take the blinders off to say.
And you have to kind of like suspend that whole fake news.
Yeah.
Like,
suspend your disbelief.
Yeah, definitely.
Right. I mean, if you can do that at a Marvel movie, you could do that here. Suspend your disbelief.
There you go.
And seek out the answers.
Yeah,
right?
definitely. Yeah. So, anyways.